Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's EPIP webinar, Strengthening the Field of Black Male Achievement Strategies for Success. This is our second EPIP webinar of 2015. I'm EPIP's Membership and Operations Manager and your host for this afternoon session, Michael Barham. We're joined by a fantastic panel of policy and communications experts who've been building and sustaining the campaign for Black Male Achievement for years. They were gracious enough to spend time planning for this webinar and take the time to share with all of us what they've learned along the way. From communications, communities of practice, to education policy, we'll have the chance, hopefully, to explore obstacles and solutions with the hope of leaving each of you with some takeaways and opportunities to use what you learn today to advance this work back at home in your work. We're very excited to get started, and I'm going to toss it and introduce our panel shortly, but before I do, just want to familiarize a few of you with who EPIP is and what we do. We're a national network of foundation professionals and social entrepreneurs and other change makers who strive for excellence in the practice of philanthropy. That means we provide a platform for our community to connect with others, learn and practice leadership skills, and inspire emerging transformative thoughts in the social sector. So we're hoping to do a little bit of everything today, and we are really grateful that you were able to join us. If you are not yet a member of EPIP, now is a fantastic time to join. We have a full slate of webinars on tap for the winter of 2015 and the spring and summer, as well as our national conference. If you're interested, please log on to our website, contact me. I'm always happy to chat EPIP. A couple of quick announcements. I just mentioned the national conference. We're very, very excited about it. We are in the midst of planning for the conference. It's taking place May 12th to May 14th in New Orleans, Louisiana. And if you aren't on our mailing list, we just recently released our call for sessions. It's open. We really encourage you to submit. Please visit the website, take a look. Feel free to email me for more information there. Our next EPIP webinar, 2 weeks from today, 3 p.m. Eastern, will be joined by Joo-Hyun Kang, who is the Director of Communities United for Police Reform, and we'll have the opportunity to talk about the intersection of racial justice, police reform, and accountability, and what that work looks like here in New York. Registration for that will open tomorrow. Please keep a lookout for more information there. We're really excited to have Joo-Hyun join us. One other note, we just want to thank our partners and all those who participated in our Boys and Men of Color Twitter chat on Thursday of last week. The discussion was hosted by ABFI, the Executives Alliance, and the Council on Foundations, along with us, and focused on how philanthropy can take a leadership role in creating innovative strategies that lead to transformative and lasting change for boys and men of color. I've included here a link to the Storify, which compiled the tweets from that conversation, but obviously very relevant to what we're talking about today. So please take a look, check that out, and jump on the website. EPIP website, we also have a blog post about that where you can find the Storify link. A couple of other quick announcements. Member Connect Measuring a Leader is our 7-skill domain, and it's an applied learning campaign. This month's focus is strategic and analytical skills. If you want to take part in the conversation, hashtag EPIP Leaders. Follow us on Twitter at EPIP National to kind of take part in that conversation. And as always, epip.org/events. That's where you can find everything that's coming up, and there certainly is a lot. Okie doke, we're about to get started. A couple of quick items of housekeeping. All attendees are on mute, as you can see during the presentation. Excuse me, during the presentation. use the question box if you have technical difficulties. If you have any content questions, we'll be monitoring those questions throughout and save some time for Q&A with our panelists and the audience at the end of the conversation. We are recording the webinar. Please visit our website to view within about a week, and we'll send out an email with more information and additional resources. And complete the post-webinar survey. As always, we want to learn how we can improve our programs and our webinars in particular. Okie doke. We are just about to get things going. Before we do, I just want to take a moment to introduce our esteemed panel. Seema Shah is the Foundation Center's Director of Research for Special Projects. She leads projects related to many of the Center's emerging strategic priorities, including international research, new forms of philanthropy, and research on diversity and inclusiveness in the philanthropic sector. Special thanks to Seema for organizing this group. We certainly couldn't have done this without her. Mark Philpart serves as the Director of Boys and Men of Color Initiatives at PolicyLink. In this role, he directs the work focused on communities of practice for the Campaign for Black Male Achievement, a national membership network working to improve outcomes for Black men and boys. And he's also the principal coordinator for the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, a statewide network of change agents working towards policy and systems change on behalf of boys and men of color. Also very happy to be joined by Rhonda Bryant. She's a senior fellow at CLASP. Her areas of expertise are education policy and youth development. She focuses on disadvantaged youth, particularly youth of color in distressed communities. And last, certainly not least, very grateful to be joined by Rashid Shabazz. He's the Vice President of Communications for the Campaign for Black Male Achievement, formerly a Program Officer for Open Society Foundation's Campaign for Black Male Achievement, and as part of the executive team for the Campaign for Black Male Achievement, Rashid helps to lead efforts around narrative change. We're certainly going to learn more about what all of our panelists do here. So without further ado, I'm happy to toss it to our first panelist, Seema Shah of the Foundation Center.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael, and thanks to EPIP National for hosting this webinar. I'm so pleased to be here today representing the Foundation Center for this conversation, which is especially timely in light of the momentum and energy propelling the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the recent spin-off of the Campaign for Black Male Achievement as a standalone organization, which you'll hear more about later in this webinar. So I'm just going to take a few minutes here at the beginning to kick off the conversation. As some of you may know, our team at the Foundation Center has been working in partnership with the Campaign for Black Male Achievement for the past several years to lift up the role philanthropy is playing, and more importantly, can play in supporting our Black men and boys. So as a part of our work with the campaign, we released the report, Where Do We Go From Here? Philanthropic Support for Black Men and Boys, back in October of 2012. In that report, we took an in-depth look at foundation funding in support of Black men and boys, provided lots of baseline data on foundation giving, and highlighted a number of innovative initiatives in the field. About 5 months after that, in March of 2013, we launched a website called bmafunders.org, which provides news, data, research reports, and a whole host of other resources on Black male achievement. The centerpiece of the site is an interactive funding map, which features our most updated giving information, so users can interact with the map and see who's funding what, where. And last year, in May of 2014, we released a second report called Building a Beloved Community, Strengthening the Field of Black Male Achievement. So for those of you well-versed in the civil rights movement, you'll know that the title, Building a Beloved Community, serves as a response to the question we posed in our first report, where do we go from here? And both of these refrains were popularized by Dr. Martin Luther King and certainly speak to his vision of a just and equitable society. So Building a Beloved Community is based on interviews with 50 leaders in the field of Black male achievement. We interviewed foundation presidents like Bob Ross of the California Endowment, Emmett Carson from Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and Darren Walker from the Ford Foundation. We also interviewed nonprofit leaders, researchers, policy folks, including staff from the White House. At the time we released the report, there was growing momentum around the work related to Black men and boys. The White House initiative, My Brother's Keeper, had just recently launched, and the work of the Executives Alliance to expand opportunities for boys and men of color was being formalized. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Alliance, the Executives Alliance is a group of foundation presidents that came together about a year and a half ago to express their commitment to advancing opportunities for boys and men of color. The original group consisted of about 26 foundations, and that's now grown to about 40 foundations. So the idea behind the report is that we stood at a pivotal moment in time, and that it was important to understand the current state of the field and also to gather the collective wisdom of leaders in the field to really get their insights on what was needed to strengthen the work moving forward. So it's now been 9 months since the report's released, and I think it's arguably even more relevant now than when we released it. So the report is divided up into two parts. I encourage you to take a look at it, but in a nutshell, the first section of the report maps the landscape of work happening in the field of Black male achievement. So we describe key actors and organizations in a variety of sectors, including philanthropy, nonprofits, academia, government, as well as the corporate and faith arenas. Now, as we were surveying the field, we found evidence of many promising efforts. For example, foundation commitments have grown in recent years, with more than 40 million in grants in 2011, up from 29 million the previous year. We also found that there are a large number of nonprofits doing work in this area, with the majority being small grassroots entities with budgets under $1 million. We also saw efforts to increase the research and evidence base for the field, with scholars like Ivory Toldson and Sean Harper really working to debunk deficit-oriented representations of Black males and contributing to the literature by studying factors that actually promote success. And in the arena of government, in addition to the excitement around My Brother's Keeper, we noted the incredible work happening at the local level through efforts like Cities United. We also saw engagement from corporate and faith communities, though our interviewees told us that there were untapped opportunities to engage these communities more deeply. So the second section of the report highlights themes and recommendations that came out of our interviews for moving this work forward. We didn't want this to be a purely academic exercise, so in each section we include tangible resources for more information, along with sidebars to dig deeper into specific examples of work happening on the ground. So on this slide, you see the key themes that emerged from our conversations with field leaders. Everything from the importance of changing the narrative to building leadership at both the grass tops and the grassroots level. Each one of these themes could certainly be the focus of their own webinar, but today we're going to do a deeper dive on a few of these, particularly the ways in which communications, policy work, and capacity building of organizations can strengthen the field of Black male achievement. So at this point, I'll turn it over to a few of the experts we interviewed for the report to talk more about these themes. We'll start with Mark Philpart from PolicyLink, who's going to talk about the work he and his colleagues are doing, particularly to strengthen the capacity of organizations. So Mark?
Thank you, Seema, and good afternoon, everyone. As Seema noted, my name is Mark Philpart, and I'm the Director of Boys and Men of Color Initiatives at PolicyLink. PolicyLink is a national research and action institute headquartered in Oakland, California, but working across the country to advance social and economic equity on behalf of low-income people and people of color. And at the heart of that work is our focus on building public will and spurring collective action to improve outcomes for those individuals and to advance equity. And this notion of equity for us is really about closing gaps and ensuring that people of color and low-income communities are not locked out of opportunity, and that they have the chance to really build opportunities for themselves and for their progeny, and folks who are in their communities to be able to succeed and thrive. And so the community of practice strategy and our work with the Campaign for Black Male Achievement really fits nicely into our focus as an organization. When we began our work with the Campaign for Black Male Achievement, the community of practice strategy was essentially meant to support a long-term collaborative infrastructure for leaders to be able to connect and share knowledge and align their activities so that they can achieve shared policy and field building goals that improve outcomes for Black men and boys. And under the community of practice strategy, the Campaign for Black Male Achievement has launched 4 communities of practice that focus on a range of areas important to Black male achievement. And those 4 are listed here. And I'll just briefly say a little bit about each of these. The Promise Neighborhoods Institute at PolicyLink hosts an affinity group of Promise Neighborhoods that are focused specifically on Black male achievement. And Promise Neighborhoods are federally funded efforts that promote cradle to career success for young people in 61 communities throughout the country. And approximately half of those communities are focused on Black male achievement. The Responsible Fatherhood Roundtable includes a group of close to 50 stakeholders from throughout the country who are focused on promoting fatherhood and the importance of men as fathers and ensuring that low-income men and Black fathers have opportunities. And those individuals are representative of a very unique set of stakeholders, including federal agencies, advocates, practitioners, and local systems leaders. The Alliance for Boys and Men of Color is a statewide network in California that is actively advancing a local and state policy agenda to improve outcomes for young people in communities throughout the state. And their efforts are focused on education, employment, health, and community justice and safety. And then through our work with the National League of Cities, we support 11 cities to have and drive a Black male achievement focus as they are doing their work to advance equity. And so this is a particularly powerful partnership led by the National League of Cities with support from the Campaign for Black Male Achievement to ensure that these cities are accessing best practices, knowledge, and information that can help them to be successful as they think about policy and systems change opportunities that can positively impact Black men and boys in their communities. So why is the COP strategy critical to Black male achievement? Essentially, as we think about the issues that are facing Black men and boys, there are several problems that exist with how the work currently is playing out throughout the country. And the community of practice strategy is aimed at addressing some of those issues. So fostering alignment and collaboration is one of the goals. And the reason why this is important is because anything worth doing can't be done alone. And in order for the work to advance in a really strong way and for us to be able to impact outcomes the way that we need to, given the diversity of issues that Black men and boys face, we really have to work together and we really have to be aligned and work on a shared set of results that allow us to drive the work forward in a really positive way. And so this effort is really about breaking down silos between leaders and ensuring that we're all on the same page as these networks are working towards a series of goals that impact Black male achievement. The second is to make sure that people are using and working from promising practices, evidence-based practices, and practices and policies that will actually have an impact at the scale that they need them to have an impact at. And so making sure that folks are privy to good information, that they are able to not only use things that are evidence-based, but things that are promising, because as we know, some of the most promising innovations are the ones that actually are the ones that can have the best impact and the best shot for some of our youth. And so making sure that these networks have an opportunity to surface these best practices, exchange them with one another, learn from others that are implementing those promising practices and policies has been a key goal of our effort to date. And lastly, enhancing the field's ability to address complex issues. This is at root the crux of why the community of practice strategy is so important. It's because many of the issues that Black men and boys face are systemic issues that require us to work at multiple angles across disciplines and at a scale that addresses the needs of the whole person and not one specific area of focus. So the work on Black male achievement is not about just the school to prison pipeline. It's not about just making sure Black men have jobs, or it's not about just making sure that they're healthy. It's about all of those things together in a combined and comprehensive and holistic way. And so that's why we're moving the community of practice strategy the way we're doing it. And how we're doing it comes down to a few basics of organizing and policy advocacy that we practice in an institutional way at a very large scale. So the numbers of network participants that we're engaging, as I mentioned, the Promise Neighborhoods Institute includes about 30 different collaboratives from throughout the country. The Responsible Fatherhood Network represents about 40 organizations. The Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, about 100 organizations. And so these are large-scale efforts, and we're facilitating them in a way that allows us to get to the type of alignment and collaboration that we need by doing things like providing technology platform and tools that allow people to come together and connect in very simple and easy ways and be privy to information that they can use to drive their work either locally at the state level or at the national level. We support and promote partnerships between communities of practice. So not just within communities of practice, making sure that these individual networks have their own sense of connection within each other, but also making sure that they connect across the body of folks who are concerned with Black male achievement nationally. So for Promise Neighborhoods that are interested in fatherhood programming, we make sure that we connect the leaders within the Responsible Fatherhood Network to those individuals and vice versa. And so that type of networking is happening across the board where we're trying to connect the dots to help people have an impact. And then we also work to make sure that each of these communities of practice has a very concrete set of shared goals and a vision and shared outcomes and results that they're striving towards. And so that is the foundation for the roadmap that guides their work. And then, as I described earlier, the evidence-based and promising practices, the way that we do this work is really by bringing in experts, bringing in practitioners who are on the ground doing the work and leading the efforts to allow them the opportunity to share just how they're doing the work that they're doing and what the opportunity is that they believe exists within their respective field to advance Black male achievement. And also connecting people to resources that can help them advance their work. Finally, the complex and systemic piece is really important. The complex and systemic issues are what we're all driving towards. And my colleague, Rhonda Bryant, will talk a little bit about the policy activity that she's been leading in just a moment. But for us at CBMA, I think the importance of it for the network participants has not always been well understood. And so we began working with people who were quite used to working from a very programmatic stance to address issues of Black male achievement. And while important to deliver programs and have strong services reaching this population, it quickly became apparent to many of them that you cannot service your way out of the challenges that Black men and boys are facing. And so working together, both at the local level and nationally, became an imperative. And so this year, many of the networks that I mentioned are focused on federal policy. So for example, the Responsible Fatherhood Roundtable is thinking about the child support rule and how the Office of Child Support Enforcement can implement that rule in a way that advances equity for Black fathers. The Promised Neighborhoods Institute is thinking about the Education and Secondary Education Act, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the ESEA, as a way to be able to drive the work of their collaborative so that the efforts that they're doing to put into place collaborative networks that work from cradle to career are actually furthered and embedded within federal education policy. And then at the local and state level, the Cities for Black Male Achievement and the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color are actively working across a range of policy issues and questions. And all of this work has raised the profile of the communities of practice in their respective fields. And so now the Responsible Fatherhood Roundtable is looked upon as a go-to leader, as a space for these conversations to take place and for leaders to be connected to good information and policy opportunities that can help advance the field. So with that, I'd like to conclude. Thank you. I look forward to the Q&A, and I'll hand it over to Rhonda Bryant.
Thanks, Mark. So thank you all for being on the webinar today. I've been asked to talk a bit about opportunities for impacting public policy. And so what I want to share with you today are my perspectives on how foundations can really move toward expanding your influence to a set of broader, more systemic and sustainable changes in policy and practice. And I think that the first step in that really is for philanthropy to recognize fully its power in this regard. Thinking about what is the unique positioning and power that foundations have to really be influential in the policy space. And I think that doing a few different things provides a significant opportunity for foundations. The first is by using your stature to begin to open doors for conversation. By using the outcomes data that programs that you funded already to make the case for more generalizable policy and opportunities to move in a new direction based on what we know has worked in the past on a programmatic level. By partnering with public systems to explore potential policy ideas, and then by funding or jointly funding pilot projects that allow you to test new policy proposals in particular communities, and then lift that up as an opportunity to look at what works in terms of a strategic policy that's impacting a particular community, in this case, Black men and boys. By creating opportunities for sharing with a broader audience some of the outcomes from any policy reforms that you've seeded in a particular community, I think that provides another strong example. And then in the case of Black men and boys specifically, using your influence and your resources to assist policymakers in ensuring that they engage in thinking and analysis that really ensures that any policy that they put forward is truly in the best interest of Black men and boys, making sure that that racial equity analysis is always at the forefront of people's minds. So how do we do that? I think the way that we approach policy formation and discussion matters greatly, and we have to look at every proposed or current policy and begin to ask some key questions. What is the goal of this proposed policy that's being put forward? And what's the underlying premise of it? Is the underlying premise really one that Black boys are assets to be valued in our communities, or is it that Black boys are lazy and need to be rehabilitated? That underlying premise says a great deal about how we approach the rest of policy formation. What's the rationale for that proposed policy? Is the rationale to impact individuals in a particular place, or is the rationale really to impact whole systems? Looking at what will the policy impact be for Black men and boys, and quantifying that in a way that allows us to see whether or not it's really in their best interest. Looking at whether or not there's intentional language regarding outcomes for Black men and boys or other marginalized communities in that particular piece of policy or legislation, for example. And is the policy really sufficient to make the desired difference that we want to see for our boys and young men? So for this example, I wanted to share the issue of education reform and to think about policy formation and the opportunities for philanthropy to influence it in the context specifically of what's happening in high school reform right now. So we know that the big push for college readiness is really at the forefront right now. A lot of the conversation is around college readiness, persistence, and completion, particularly for Black men and boys. And we know that as a nation, we're pushing to continue to increase high school graduation rates and to lead the world in college graduates. Current discussions around the Elementary and Secondary Education Act have this focus, as does the President's 2016 budget proposal. Research tells us that there are 4 things that high school students need in order to be ready for college and for career success. And those 4 things you see here on this slide, they're cognitive strategies, content knowledge, academic behaviors, contextual skills, and awareness. However, the problem is that we know that there is a tremendous disconnect between what Black children need for their academic success and what we actually offer to them in the public school system. Can you go to the next slide for me? Thanks. And then the next one. So there are 4 facts that we know demonstrate this tremendous disconnect. The first is that we know that Black students are less likely to have higher level classes taught in their high schools. We know that 57% of Black high school students have full access to the classes that they need to be deemed college ready, which means there's a huge percentage of Black students that don't have that access. The second fact we know is that Black students are not encouraged or supported to enroll in higher level classes, even when they're offered in their buildings. So although Black students comprise 16% of the high school population, they only comprise 8% of the students that take calculus, and they only comprise 9% of the students that take AP classes. We also know that Black students, particularly those that live in low-income families, are less likely to be taught by experienced teachers, and we know that they're less likely to have sufficient access to high school counselors in their buildings. When we look, for example, at the percentage of students who are in schools where more than 20% of their teachers are in their first year, we know that Black students are 4 times more likely to be in that category than whites. So then the question becomes, why do we approach public policy from a frame of lack of individual achievement instead of a frame of lack of systemic equity? So as advocates in a philanthropic setting, you have the opportunity to use your influence to reframe policy, and in this case, education policy, from a conversation regarding student deficits to a conversation regarding systems deficits. So how do we do that? We can do that by using data to make the case, which is a lot of what I do in my role at the Center for Law and Social Policy, and by disseminating that data widely to begin to spark discussion and to shift thinking. The second thing that we can do is to engage in storytelling to change the narrative and to challenge stereotypes, which my colleague Rashid will talk about in his presentation. We can also provide technical resources and information to policymakers and their staff, locally or nationally, to influence a particular topic or to influence issues about which we have particular expertise. In the case of Seema and Grace's report, which you heard about earlier, they are synthesizing the viewpoints of the field, and they're providing context that's important for policymakers to hear and see to help them shape the way that they approach any policy that they attempt to engage with. And then the important thing is to really get all of these various strategies in front of those who make decisions, our policymakers nationally and locally, and by making sure that we have a presence in policymaking conversations. So I think it's important for us to realize that philanthropy has a tremendous opportunity to use its power to influence our communities and our nation in meaningful ways that will have lasting impact beyond a single programmatic endeavor, such as what Mark was mentioning earlier, and to really begin to look at how we can take all of our learning about our programmatic endeavors and translate that for people into meaningful opportunities to shift the way that we put policy in place so that beyond a single program, we can see changes in how we administer education or justice or health policies in ways that are impacting our Black men and boys in strategic ways. So with that, I'm going to pass off to Rashid to allow him to present before we take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda, and thank you, EPIP, for the opportunity to be on this webinar and to participate. As was mentioned earlier, my name is Rashid Shabazz. I'm Vice President of Communications for the Campaign for Black Male Achievement. It's truly an honor to be on this call and this webinar, not only because of the campaign and what we've been able to achieve, but also because of the colleagues that are on this call with us in this webinar. So I thank you again for the opportunity. Because of the timing and because we have a lot to cover, what I will do is, if we can go to the first slide, and what we'll discuss is what I really want to start off with is to Seema's point. I was happy when she mentioned Dr. King and the focus being around building a beloved community. I think at the heart of what the Campaign for Black Male Achievement is doing, and what Sean Dove, our CEO, and what we focus on, is really building beloved communities across the country as it relates to Black men and boys. When we began the campaign, Sean would also often come into the office and talk about 5 focus factors. And one of the core of those things that we wanted to do, which was acknowledged early on, was sustain the campaign for Black Male Achievement. And by doing so, there were 4 other additional things that we thought we really needed to do in order to do so. The first was to serve as a catalyst for the field of philanthropy. And so a lot of what Rhonda was talking about in terms of the role and the power that foundations have, and the individuals who are on this call can actually have impact to help drive. Sean and myself, when we started with the campaign, really saw an opportunity to be catalytic and entrepreneurial, and use the opportunity with the support of the Open Society Foundations and George Soros and his backing to really think about how can we help elevate and keep at the center of philanthropic and public and policy discourse a focus on Black men and boys. Often the conversation wavers. You see episodic moments where Black men and boys are focused on. We know, for example, there had been a history with the Kellogg Foundation, which is now doing a lot more work around the issue again around boys and men of color. But early on in the late 90s, there was work happening with the leadership of Bobby Austin and others. And so we looked at that history and we thought about what we need to do at this time, at this moment, to really think about how to sustain the work and affect the disparities that are facing Black men and boys in this country. I also appreciate the fact that Rhonda focused on how do we focus around the assets as it relates to Black men and boys and not so much the deficits. But one of the things that is also the challenge is that we do know there are disparities. We do know there are challenges, but how do we not allow the challenges to create the illusion or the idea that the individuals themselves are the problem when we actually have to address the systems? So Mark talked a lot about the communities of practice and the work, but one of the things that we decided on to be clear about as a campaign was that we not only wanted to sustain the campaign, but we also wanted to define the field. When we started this work in 2008 with Sean, and when I came on in 2009, there was still debate around whether or not there is actually a field for Black male achievement. I think this call, this webinar, allows us the opportunity to actually acknowledge that we've come so far in that conversation. And so now we do have a field for Black male achievement. We've defined it. In order to do that, as we look at this first slide, we talk about the importance of supporting strong leaders and organization, sustaining a focused attention, focusing on the ways in which Black men and boys are perceived, and really thinking about what we call network building and coordinating to the point around the community of practice, a sense of collaboration, support, camaraderie of individuals who've for so long been working on this issue and have not felt connected in a place where they can actually say, I'm not alone, that I can actually carry this forward. And so what Sean often likes to say is like, how do we quantify hope? And for us, the idea of beloved community, the idea of Dr. King, is to think about how do we quantify the opportunity to measure the impacts that are necessarily to change the life outcomes for Black men and boys, both on a systemic level, on a local community level, but also how do you think about how do you measure both those impacts and lift up the things that are working, but how do we also be honest about the things that are not working and try to address those things up front. And so the campaign, and we can go to the next slide, has really been trying to work towards that goal of focusing on how do we build a network, a movement of Black men and boys and organizations committed to improving their life outcomes. So on this slide, you'll see the mission, and Michael did a great job in the introduction, lifting us up. We are a national membership network. As was acknowledged early on, we formally were part of the Open Society Foundations. We're thankful to Mr. Soros and the executive leadership of the foundation of Chris Stone and others who saw fit and had confidence in both Sean Dove and myself and the team to give us seed funding to continue and sustain the focus around the campaign, not just within the foundation, but to actually spin off. And so this February, Black History Month, we are honored and happy to say we are a standalone organization. We had a soft launch on January 19th, but our official offices are now up and running, and we are excited about the opportunity to carry forth this network and help build and sustain the organizations and leaders in the field. At the core of our strategies are three core strategies. One that I've mentioned is capacity building. The second is strategic communications, which folds within it a focus around field promotion and really focusing on lifting up the leaders and individuals and the projects and the successes in the field. And the third is around network building. And for us, the solution, which seems pretty simple, but has not been one that has been focused on in the formula, is often that if we are able to build strong leaders and strong organizations, we'll have a strong Black male achievement field. And for us, this is very critical because from the reports that have been done from the Urban Institute after the Kellogg Foundation and the Village Foundation had done their work, a lot of what we learned from that report, where we saw that over 75% of the organizations that were supported and funded through the Kellogg Foundation, through the Village Foundation support around Black men and boys, that a number of those organizations has shut their doors. Only 25% were continuing to do that work. And so for Sean and myself and what we were doing with the campaign, all of our supporters, we asked the question, not on our watch, but what can we do to ensure that this does not happen, that those organizations that are supporting and working on this issue, that are working tirelessly, that are working on volunteer-based recruits, how do we ensure that they continue to have a sustained focus over a period of time? And so for us, that means supporting the organizations to get stronger and also focusing on the improving the life outcomes and measuring that impact. We can go to this next slide. So this slide goes in a little bit more deeper around what we're doing under those three core areas of work. With the capacity building, we talked a little bit about it, but primarily with our partner of Root Cause and the work of Andrew Wolk and what they're doing that we're very excited about. We're able to build a community of practice, focus around capacity building, but primarily what we're able to do is ensure that the growth sustainability of the field and the organizations are there. We're able to measure the impacts. We're able to provide them supports around financial sustainability, performance measurements, and their leadership and team and governance. And one of the things that we've been able to do, which we're very excited about, is launch a Social Innovators Accelerator, which is lifting up the best of the best, really looking at the models that we would love to see replicated and giving them wraparound services to go before funders, to go before others, to demonstrate their models of success and lift them up. And those nominations are actually open right now. So if you go to blackmaleachievement.org, you can actually, if you are an organization or if you know of organizations that are doing great work, they should definitely apply to be a social innovation accelerator and be able to get that support. The second area of our work is primarily around communications. And Sean and I would like to think this is the heart of our work. We know that in order to change the ways in which the systems affect the life outcomes of Black men and boys, that we have to reach the heart of minds of individuals. One of the things that Dr. King talked about in not only Beloved Community, but in a speech that he wrote called Where Do We Go From Here, which is translated into a book later on, he talks about several things. And one of the first things he talks about is the question about we must first ask the question where we are currently and what is the challenges that we face. But one of the other things that I think was very prophetic for him was for us to think about the ways in which we are portrayed as African Americans in general, both women and men, but think about how we need to assert our dignity and worth. So it's really interesting at this time, speed forward to 2015, where we see movements around the country around Black Lives Matter, around Black Out for Human Rights, and organizations such as the Organization for Black Struggle and others around the issues that we've seen ignited with the killing of Mike Brown, the death of Trayvon Martin, and others, that we see now a movement of individuals calling for the dignity and worth of Black lives, Black women, and men. And so for us, strategic communication is at the core of this work. And for us, it's not just about changing perceptions. It's often what we like to think about, which is lifting up the true stories and lifting up what is the reality, that Black men are succeeding at certain places, that Black men are contributing to their communities. And so we're excited about, for example, partnerships with the Be Me communities and Travian Shorters and the work that they're doing and lifting up the promotion around the work. So for us, not only are we putting out reports that Seema talked about, not only are we funding and supporting projects that are lifting up the assets and changing perceptions, but for us now, it's really about promoting the work of the campaign, but also promoting the work of the organizations that are part of the network, which is at this point over 3,000 organizations and individuals focused on this issue that are now members of the network. And then the third area for us is around network building. And network building is a critical piece because at the core of what we believe, and Sean likes to talk about the idea of hometown heroes and local leaders, is what we're trying to support in this work, in this effort, that we're the ones who actually are going to have impact and change on this issue, that we want to be able to support them, but we also want to foster a sense of collaboration and know that we can't do this alone. There's no way that any organization standalone can do it to change the massive issues that we're addressing in this moment. And so one of the things that I like to lift up is one, collaboration, and several others that we've just partnered with. One is Catch a Fire, which is a partnership where we're able to tap into skill-based volunteers for the field to be able to supply resources and tools so they can actually do the work and be able to do it with professional supports from individuals from consulting firms and other areas around the country to be able to support that work. We also have partnerships with organizations that Mark talked about, like the National League of Cities and Cities United, which is an organization that is now launched that was first seeded with support from the Open Society Foundation's campaign for Black Male Achievement, but with leadership from Casey Family Programs and William Bell, to really focus on changing the trajectory of the homicide rates that are facing African American males. And so with the support of Mayor Landrieu out of New Orleans and Mayor Nutter, we're able to form a cross-sector collaboration with the support and help also of Policy Link and others that are on this call to help drive a conversation around how do we address the disparate impact of homicide rates affecting Black men and boys in the communities around the country. And so that's, for us, collaboration is a core piece of what we're doing. And then we go to the next slide. And so for us, as this is a key moment that we're in, we're excited to be an entity that is launched now to take on this historic moment that we believe we're in. We've seen a number of things call to action. We've seen the issues and the movement building, as I've mentioned. We've seen the President of the United States talk about My Brother's Keeper and the launch of that. We're glad that we've been part of that conversation and helping to bring that to fruition. And we also have seen the executive alliance that Seema talked about come into fruition as well. And so for us, there's no better time than the present for the Campaign for Black Male Achievement to be launched and to actually be at this moment to really take on the challenges that we've been addressing and talking about today, but also to think about the ways in which we continue to serve as a catalyst for philanthropy to help focus on this issue. And so the last thing, we go to the last slide, and what I will just wrap up in saying is, for us, we really believe this focus around Black men and boys is not just about Black men and boys, it's about our communities at large, it's about our society as a whole. And so for us, as I've mentioned, our focus is primarily around lifting up the leaders and the organizations supporting their work. It's around keeping a focus on this issue, but most importantly, it's thinking about how do we ensure that African American boys and men have the access to the American dream that we talk about, and what are the barriers to those dreams that we want to take down that Rhonda was talking about. So the campaign, we're excited to be part of this conversation. We're excited to be helping to launch this issue forward and push it forward. We're happy to have the support of a strong board. We have Tanya Allen from the Skillman Foundation, who's our board chair. We have Jeff Canada, who formerly of the Harlem Children's Zone, but also continues to serve on the board of Open Society Foundation's U.S. programs. And so for us, we have what we think the making and the right ingredients for us to be successful. We have great talent from the Policy Link team and root cause teams working with us, and we're building this out. So we again appreciate the opportunity, and we just look forward to the time that we have left for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rashid, and thanks to all of our panelists, and congratulations, Rashid, to you. And I know we have Sean on the call on you know, kind of the spinoff of the campaign on its own as an organization, and good luck to you all. And we're really happy to be here as you all launch. So we have a few minutes left, folks, and really want to open this up to Q&A. Now is your time. Ask our panelists any questions you might have. Please don't be shy. We only have a few minutes remaining, so what I'll do is leave it open for a second. If not, I certainly have a few questions I can ask. That was really interesting stuff to hear from folks, and we're glad that you were able to share so much. It looks like we have a few questions coming in, and I know we talked about some of this, but and one question is, how do we connect with the panelists after the call? We'll make sure to share some of that info on our recap. We'll send an email out to folks. The webinar recap will be available on the EPIP website, so please look out for that. We'll make sure there's a way to connect with panelists. I know many of you probably want to. And I know we already, we talked something about what funders can do to be supportive, but I think if anyone is interested in kind of building on that question, we had that come in from our very own Rasan Harris. So if you can build a little bit on that, and I know especially Rhonda, you talked something about that, but what else can funders do to be supportive? And if you're, maybe if you're working at a foundation that might not prioritize this work, how can you move that up the list of priorities? And I'd like to open that up to any of our panelists.
This is Mark. Can I take a stab at it?
Please do.
So, I think everything Rhonda articulated is right, and I would just like to build on it coming from a community of practice perspective and the work that we do with CBMA. Philanthropy and the resources that these institutions have are extend way beyond just money, and I think thinking about the way that these organizations can have influence and provide support is particularly critical. And one example, from our work with the Responsible Fatherhood Roundtable is that we have a couple of foundations that participate in that space. They offer research support, they help with convening, they bring in best practices examples and promising practice examples from the set of grantees that they work with. And I think these are just some of the ways that you can begin to advance Black male achievement agenda is by, being active, participating in these spaces, supporting networks in a really focused way, and thinking creatively beyond just monetary contributions about how you can support these efforts and how you can engage.
Thanks a lot, Mark. That's a fantastic answer. Did someone else want to jump in? Please do.
Yeah, this is Rashid. I would love to just add to Mark's point, because I think he raised a great one, which is a lot of times we want to think about the resources and funding being the primary support, but I think one of the things I would encourage people to do is, one, visit bmafunders.org and support the site and really learn more about what is happening in philanthropy around this issue, and also visit the work of the Executive Alliance and for Boys and Men of Color. But I also think it's equally important, groups such as the Association of Black Foundation Executives. I remember when I joined as a grant maker at the Open Society Foundations, the best thing I think I did early on was join AFI and Sean and I in those partnerships, and was able to build across various foundations relationships with individuals who shared a similar focus and belief around this issue, but not just around Black men and boys, but around racial equity, and really promoting that. And I think that conversation, those supports from the outside your own institution sometimes can help foster information that you may need to help drive the conversation internally. It also allows you a space to have a place where you could bounce off ideas, but also to share about some of the challenges that you're facing, both personally and professionally. And I think AFI does a great job of doing that, and CBMA has been a supporter of both the land and helping to see the work that they're doing with the Leadership and Action Network that AFI has been leading. And I would just lift them up and to push them as a resource to help facilitate the ongoing conversation about the ways in which philanthropy can get engaged, because I don't think it's a one answer. It's a multi-prong, and having been in philanthropy, continuing to play a role as a philanthropic outfit through the Campaign for Black Male Achievement, will still be supporting groups through grant making. I think it's really important to continue to think about how do we collaborate and build relationships across the various sectors, but particularly in philanthropy, it's a key focus, and I think AFI does a great job of doing that.
This is Rhonda, and I think there's a lot that we can learn too by looking at how people in other issue areas approach some of these partnerships. For example, in the arena of child welfare, we've seen partnerships between philanthropy, research entities, and public policy entities to really advance an agenda in a meaningful way. And so taking the learnings from specific programs and doing concrete research, qualitative and quantitative, on them, and then having the public policy entity to take that research and translate it into regular everyday language for people to understand, and then the philanthropic partner kind of undergirding all of that and helping to create audiences and spaces for that message to get out. All of that was critically important in moving an agenda to change federal legislation around child welfare. And so taking that same kind of model and implementing it around the issue of Black male achievement could really move the field in an amazing way.
Thank you, Rhonda. I love those answers. Rashid, absolutely. You don't have to tell us about the importance of network building, because that's a lot of what we try to do here at EPIP. Unfortunately, folks, we don't have time for any more questions. We're up just past 4 p.m. But like we mentioned, we'll make sure to make contact information for our panelists available. We want to make sure there's the opportunity to collaborate moving forward. And an email, like we said, coming out within the week with all of that information and the webinar recording, slides, and some additional resources, including the Building a Beloved Community report from the Foundation Center. So with all that, I want to thank you all for joining us. This was a really vibrant conversation, and I'm absolutely grateful for all of the attendees, and especially grateful to our panelists, Seema, Mark, Rhonda, Rashid. That was a fantastic conversation. Thanks for sharing your time and your expertise with us, and hopefully we can do this again in the future. Thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon.